An awakening is an experience that changes the relationship to yourself and reality. It's a crucial aspect of all personal development and self-discovery. But people think that awakening itself is some sort of endpoint, a point of happiness, peace, and comfort. But that's sadly not the case. What's not talked about is how dark this path truly is. It's brutal to move towards awakening. I went through this process myself and guided others through their darkest moments. I've seen horrible things personally, and I've also witnessed horrible things people have done. There's some existentially very troubling philosophy that will be discussed here, so consider this as a warning. I will be direct and explicit about what experiences are common for people, and what are more on the fringe end of things that indicate that something may have gone seriously wrong. For those who are into philosophy, philosophy is often the only way to make sense of this darkness. But philosophy also becomes a source for a lot of darkness, because the mind imagines itself into all sorts of existential conundrums. Philosophy is often thought to be impractical or a waste of time by those who are not interested in philosophy, but there are many philosophical ideas that will drastically change the trajectory of your life. Philosophical ideas can be parasites and cause hell in your mind. Many issues that happen through the process of realization come from a philosophical mind thinking itself into a worse reality than the actual one. But there also are many dark experiences that almost everybody will go through when they discover themselves, where the sense of identity is confronted with a reality it has not previously thought possible. During the dark aspects of existential transformation, it is guaranteed that you will sense a deep cosmic loneliness. It's the painful realization that a certain type of unison that you've always been seeking is not possible, because there's a fundamental loneliness to being an individual subject. There often comes a feeling of grief when you realize that this loneliness can never be mended. People often start to feel this way during a breakup with somebody they loved. There it becomes very obvious how alone you truly are in this world, where it is felt that nobody can truly know you because nobody can understand how it's like to be you. The feeling of loneliness often comes from a feeling of not being able to share one's own pain. This emotional pain that one can feel has a depth to it that feels overwhelming and profound, often described as a pit in the stomach or a chill down your spine. During this process of psychological realization of the self, there can be a sense that you are doomed. And then you feel lots of fear, and panic attacks also can happen at this stage. When the philosophical mind externalizes this idea of being trapped and alone in the fabric of reality itself, then there can be a strong sense that the world itself is evil, and you are coming in contact with some sort of force that feels like it is malicious, as if existence itself is wishing you harm. Everybody who has had a bad trip on psychedelics probably knows this feeling. It's like you come into contact with something that you weren't supposed to see, as if existence feels all wrong. But you don't have to experience drugs to know what the state is like. All you need is direct contact with some duality or separation within existence, where you feel somehow isolated or separated from reality itself. I personally have had visions of unspeakable horrors. I know some that have seen alien landscapes that feel very awful but can't be put into words. Just odd geometry or weird entities that wish you harm. In my case, I didn't see any of that. I just felt that the room itself was horrible. So horrible, in fact, that I wished that nothing ever existed at all. Everything just felt so unspeakably evil, because in my mind I would make the calculation of all the suffering that exists and couldn't make this mathematical equation in favor for life. It seems that there are states so exotically bad that they are both traumatizing, but also morbidly fascinating that they are possible at all. They make you feel like life was a mistake, but also like you're playing with forces that are way above your control. Like you're seeing something you're not supposed to see. This sense of loneliness, plus this feeling that there's something wrong with reality, is something that had followed me previously since I was a teen. And with the feeling of loneliness, plus this fear, there comes also the question of identity. Who am I and what am I? This is a crucial part of this maturation process, and what it will eventually lead you towards is a feeling of utter emptiness. There comes a point when nothing makes sense, and your entire life feels like a lie. This realization can be relieving for some people, depending on how you relate to your life. Like nothing really mattering can be good when you realize that the lies that you've told yourself were just causing you suffering, which is actually a revealing and liberating aspect of awakening. But if you have been attached to some crucial aspect of your life, then realizing that the entire existence is a sort of illusion and none of it really matters the way you thought it did, can also be extremely destabilizing and horrifying. I've seen two types of reactions that are very common once this realization is made. Either people develop a sort of savior complex, where they feel like they need to save humanity and save reality from all its suffering. Or there's the reaction to want to burn it all to the ground, like they wish it all to cease and disappear, as if the world is not worth saving at all. This is the tendency that I've had. But usually you always have a mix of both. But from them stem a sense of toxic relationship to oneself. I've also talked to people who, through this process of awakening, made reckless financial decisions, wanting to sell their house and move somewhere abroad or giving it all away to charity. There's a tendency for the mind to do something radical, to feel like empower or to have the ability to change. I've talked to people who have severely destroyed their life just by making a stupid financial decision on a whim, and it's really sad to witness. I also worked with people who were inflicted by delusions, feeling like the government or secret organizations are persecuting them, often the Illuminati or other nefarious groups. This might seem very silly if you've never had these level of delusions, but they are also a symptom of a mismanaged identity disintegration that in modern science and psychology is not well understood. I think almost all people in psych wards have sadly just not had the right support or not have had the right people around them to truly understand what they were going through. So we tend to just pathologize it and call these people crazy and lock them away, or medicate them instead of actually helping them move through the process. It all relates to how the self wants to dissolve in this process and how you can facilitate that. But there also can be a variety of undiagnosed conditions that nobody really knows of. I've talked to people who have locked themselves into constant fear. When something doesn't follow through in this identity disintegration process, what can happen is that the identity or the ego gets chronically stuck. Then it is constantly fearing its own dissolution and holding back so aggressively that it feels like you are confronted with constant, unrelenting fear. This is what anxiety is in a nutshell, but turned up to the max. What then starts to happen is that you fear itself, and it loops itself around, and nobody can really understand what is going on with you. This often is accompanied with a sense that you're getting sucked into consciousness or dissolving into reality, as if objects in reality are communicating with you. There's a fear that you'll disappear all of a sudden and just die. The mind then clings to the idea of a real and solid self to fight this dissolution process, and therefore constantly remains tense. It's like permanently wanting to avoid ego death. This is what creates such an enormous amount of fear, as the ego resisting reality is what causes this fear. Helping people move through such situations feels very meaningful to me, because I know how deep this fear can truly go. It's so hard for people to understand who have not been in it. Psychedelics can cause this, but other practices can too, like shamanic practices or other self-inquiry and just self-reflective work. Often traumatizing experiences are a deep catalyst for such transformations. Fear is a normal aspect for everybody on this path to varying degrees though. And it's also very much guaranteed that at some point you will feel an amount of fear you think you can't handle. There's a terrifying nature to having a body, and when you realize the implication, there can be a lot of visions of things that terrify you, things that already have happened to you in the past, fearing that they might happen again, which are basically your traumas, or also visions of things that have not happened to you but to other people, like visions of mutilation, gore, or getting tortured in some brutal way. The philosophical mind tends to understand at some point in this process that reality is one system, and that therefore, if it's real for another person, it also can be real for you. From there stems a sort of toxic empathy, where you suffer suffering that is not yours. You become overly empathetic in a way that makes it very easy to imagine that something horrible might happen to you as well. Or you might think it's already happening, but just in another version of you or another timeline. It basically stops mattering who is feeling pain, because you're just seeing pain as an inescapable reality, and you're hyper-focused on it. This is quite a horrible predicament to be in, because you now carry the burden of all the suffering in the universe for yourself, and there's a clear impetus to think that it's not worth it to live. This level of toxic empathy is actually quite common. In spirituality, people use empathy a lot as some sort of evidence for how spiritual they are. It relates to the desire to save the world and be special in some form. It's toxic because it's actually hiding the inner wound that wants to be healed. It externalizes something personal and makes it about the cosmos and existence as a whole, instead of personal issues one needs to resolve. So then, this becomes a sort of virus that virtue signals to other people of how spiritual or enlightened they are, or how they have transcended their suffering. You can see that this is another cause for even greater suffering, as you might dismiss other people's feelings or rationalize them away with suffering is all an illusion or things alike. You can see that all psychological transformation relates in one way or another to awakening. This process is just a question of how deep do you want to go? How deep are you in it for you to not be able to return? At a certain level of realization, you cannot go back. But it doesn't mean that you need to walk the entire way through. You only want to put yourself into a point of peace and contentment. But it's always one's own trauma and past darkness that must be seen through. And there's really no way of avoiding that. It never feels good to confront this, and it actually can feel like you're re-traumatizing yourself sometimes. But you're not. All this darkness is good, as hard as it is to believe when you're in it. I will come to why in a second. It's important to note that there's no need to fix the world or to save humanity or anything like that. All what I've said here is real and true, and these experiences happen to people. But there's no point in fighting this. There's no point in fighting this as something outside yourself to fix, if you're not content yourself. You alone already carry the weight of the cosmos on your shoulders as an individual. There's no need to be putting your mind into some other people's suffering or imagine some hypothetical end of the world scenario. Your sanity must always come first, because when you're happy, you're going to make the world happier too. I will explain why all of this has to be like this, and I will hopefully give you a framework that makes all of this more easily to understand. But first I want to tell you a bit about the darkest point for me, which was after a bad psychedelic trip that traumatized me. This was in the beginning of 2021. I'll probably make a trip report about this at some point, but it was the worst experience of my life, to keep it short. For 2 years or so, it messed with my head in a way that was very, very difficult to get through. Before this trip, I already had problems accepting the suffering of reality and its nature. I've always been very philosophical about this stuff and with life. But when I saw how bad experience can truly get, it got very, very difficult for me to relate to other people or to share my experience with other people. It's difficult to put it into words or into numbers, but if I'm going to be completely honest, if the worst experience of my life at this point was a 10 out of 10 bad, this bad trip went into the millions quick. I was thinking about jumping off the balcony because I thought that if this is possible, I don't want to be alive. All of existence must have been a mistake. I understood at this point how serious and how powerful your psyche truly is, and how it can get so much worse than people can possibly empathize with. Again, there's a lot more to tell here, and even this trip had a lot of very blissful moments. I know now that what happened at this point is that I resisted ego death, plus there were other factors that made this experience so awful, and there's a lot to gain and to tell about this experience, but this will be for another time. Afterwards, I suffered from anhedonia. It's a condition where you can't feel any pleasure at all. I felt empty in a different way. This anhedonia gladly only lasted for a couple of days, but it made me feel like I'm not in reality yet, or that there's a sort of barrier or distance between me and reality. I also started to become very, very panicky all of a sudden. I heard birds chirping outside my room and then started to get panic sweats. Days, weeks, months after this trip. It was so hard for me to accept that what I went through truly was possible, and I thought about it every single day for 2 years. I also started to have the sensation that I was merging with other people, like I am other people, or that reality will at any point dissolve and put me back into this trip. I struggled to understand the difference between my body and other people's bodies, and the feeling that I also was other people became almost a daily thought. And mind you, at this point I didn't have any of the spiritual language for things. This is also what made it also scary, like I had no real point of reference, nobody I knew that could whatsoever relate with the depth of what I was experiencing. The profundity of this experience is what made it so hard, because I knew that normal society can't even imagine a sliver of how it was like. I didn't think about the words of ego death either at this point, neither awakening or enlightenment or any of this. All I could feel is scared and a deep need to understand what was going on with me. I knew that I messed up with something really serious, so I had to learn what the hell was going on with my head. The worst panic was when I sensed this idea of solipsism, which is the idea that you are the only being in the universe that is conscious, and no other conscious beings actually exist. When this idea got seriously contemplated for the first time in my mind, it was a weird contortion that I felt in my experience. It felt very much unsettling in a gut-wrenching way. The problem is that it doesn't feel like a philosophical idea. It feels like a realization of utter loneliness and illusion. And it also made logical sense for me at this point, because after such a profound experience, I tried to grapple what reality is in a way that I couldn't have done before. Because on one hand, I learned that the only thing that truly matters is my own experience. And I also understood that my own experience of consciousness is the only thing that I can truly be certain of. Like, you've never actually witnessed another person's consciousness. You've always been alone in your own, so you actually don't really know if other consciousnesses are real. And since my bad experience, from my own point of view, lasted for an infinite amount of time, when I came back, I felt like I'm literally the center of the universe. And with this cocktail of ideas, the sensation that I'm the universe, plus feeling existentially alone and full of fear and disassociation, I was certain that I was going insane, and nobody would ever be able to listen to me or trust me in what I went through. Panic shifted into pure madness. To this entire mess, I started to studying philosophy in the context of esoteric text, spirituality and ego dissolutions, while also remaining grounded in science and how biology actually functions. And that's when my life truly started to change. I started to see how the mechanisms of the mind and the ego operate, and how the human psyche works at the edge of a modern understanding. I learned about how the default mode network and the prefrontal cortex are the parts in your brain that control the sense of self and decision making. I knew that the ego originates there and creates all sorts of depression, anxieties, and mental illnesses. And sadly, people who are into spirituality have never gotten the tools to understand what goes on in a scientific way. There's a specific reason why people in the spiritual path get so delusional, because they become so ungrounded by what their consciousness shows them, and they lack the practical tools to ground all of this darkness. And then there's the deep personal question of why this darkness is necessary. No matter which tools you use, this question remains deeply personal, and it is one that at the end I can help you with, but only you can answer it for yourself so that it feels satisfying. But I'm going to give you some food for thought of why all of this darkness has to be a fabric of reality and how to transcend this need to want to fix it. Wholeness can be found here. So to answer this question of why is reality so dark and how can one understand it, accept it, overcome it, I want to ask you a serious question. What makes something deep? If you think that this video has depth, or your favorite video game or movie you love is profound, where does this feeling of profundity come from? If you ponder this question for long enough, you will come to realize that the only reason something feels profound is because this profundity relates to pain. Deep things relate to the potential of being deeply hurt. When you try to find meaning in such a cruel world that hurts you without your consent, there's this question of meaning that emerges. What is the meaning of my pain? What is the meaning of all the suffering and cruelty? And then we mistakenly come to the conclusion that there is no meaning to it, and that the pain itself is evidence of the lack of meaning in reality. But that's completely backwards. The cruelty is deeply meaningful, and it makes kindness especially meaningful by contrast. Meaning, in fact, can only exist through stakes. When there are high stakes for something to go wrong or right, now we are invested in the movie. Now we are invested in what will happen next. Will he find love, or will he die? Will he win the war, or will humanity go extinct? Or also, will I win the game of LOL, or will bot lane keep feeding? After 5 hours of Monopoly, if everybody is really emotionally invested, it can be quite a high-stakes event. Then it's fun. And I swear, if a movie makes you cry, it touches a truth beyond fiction. Meaning comes from the fact that there's weight behind the consequences of our action, and we ourselves can even make up these consequences. Billions of men crying and cheering because their favorite team put a ball into a net. All of this is perceived as real. And how do we know that it really is real? What makes it real? Because you feel the pain of loss and the pleasure of success. There's nothing more obvious than when pain hits your nervous system. And by contrast, when you love something, it makes all these moments of pain you thought was unbearable worth it. Joy, by contrast, is also part of the stakes. Will you be able to cheer and finally be content because you reached your financial goals? Did you finally meet the love of your life and don't have to be alone forever? By extension, every small decision you make is real because it ripples real consequences through reality. There are real risks with everything you do. Every interaction means something because there are real consequences that are felt. If you wouldn't feel them, there would be no reality. Risk of loss and risk of unexpected happiness. Excitement is practical happiness because it plays with risk. It plays with the adventure. Doing something new and different is exhilarating. Conquering that fear by asking out this person you had a crush on, starting this new business and taking the leap. Becoming who you can become matters because the consequences are real. The barrier between your body and the death of your body is real, and the darkness is there to remind you of it. In this universe, you're free to do what you want to do. There's a freedom to it all, because there are no limitations to what can happen and what these stakes can be. That's the freedom and gift that responsibility comes with. And you can't deny it. You can't deny the power you hold yourself. It's not useful to imagine things that are not real for you, but you can confront whatever's real for you right now, in whatever your heart is trying to lead you towards. It will probably include some aspect of fear and discomfort and looking into the abyss, but when you do so willingly, you can find paradise on the other side. The fact that nothing is guaranteed is the adventure, and the universe by design has no limitation, no boundaries to its infinitude. So there you find a place of infinite stakes, infinite risks, and infinite potential. Everything you find joy in this existence is a world that is only possible because the stakes are real. There's no way to limit reality to minimize the potential for pain or minimize the potential for joy. This is what freedom has to look like. The moment you carve in a limitation to reality, you limit freedom. Time at the end of the day is always the saving grace. It's the mercy that makes everything not last forever. But if you were to limit reality and say this is the amount of pain that is allowed, and this is the amount of joy that is allowed, then you also limit the nature of change. Now suddenly there could be a reality where you're stuck forever. You need to feel the pain because it's the price you pay for freedom. But one thing I want to promise you, and this is really important, all of the emotional and mental pain you feel is not necessary. You can heal yourself from the mind and become free in a way most people can't imagine. Levels of consciousness you can't conceive of. Perceptions of existence so amazing that it's like out of the sweetest of your dreams. Because when you're able to see the immensity of this darkness and the limitless potential of the universe, you will also start to understand and see how immense the bliss can be, how immense the joy can be. Life has inherent beauty to it because of how limitless it is. And this yearning is calling you. It just requires to look. I write structured guides and essays on my Substack on how to access these deeper levels of awareness and consciousness. I will release an essay this week where I go into depth of the mechanics that create these delusions that I've talked about before, on why it is necessary to face the cosmic loneliness and why is it so common to become deluded by being persecuted by government entities or starting to believe in some sort of solipsistic notion of reality. Subscribe to my Substack to don't miss this post.